Good morning. I'm the Reverend Steve Cook, minister of Hopedale Unitarian Parish. I'd like to welcome you to our worship service, this virtual worship service this morning. Excuse me. I'm at home in my house in Quincy, where it is a lovely fall morning. I hope it's a nice day wherever you are. In our Facebook universe. The decision to gather only by Zoom today was made earlier this week in response to the unfortunate uptick in COVID-19 infections here in the state. This is sad news. As a whole community, we should be doing the right thing, but it seems too many are not taking the basic precautions to avoid this terrible disease, particularly in regard to holiday travel. We must hope for the best and prepare for the worst. So thanks to all of you who have made the adjustment. Thanks for joining us. Thanks particularly to Jody Buck, our great parish administrator, who has done wonderful work educating this technically challenged minister to get up and going on this whole thing. And thanks to her particularly. It's a pleasure to welcome this morning's guest minister, the Reverend Fred Small. Fred and I have been colleagues in the ministry since sometime in the previous century, I believe. Fred?
Yes.
He is a multi-talented individual, lawyer, troubadour, parish minister, and now a full-time warrior for the earth as the Minister for Climate Justice at the Arlington Street Church in Boston. Fred, you are welcome to our pulpit.
Thank you, Steve. The opening words this morning are by the Reverend Angela Herrera, Senior Minister of First Unitarian Church in Albuquerque. Don't leave your broken heart at the door. Bring it to the altar of life. Don't leave your anger behind. It has high standards, and the world needs vision. Bring them with you, and your joy and your passion. Bring your loving and your courage and your conviction. Bring your need for healing and your powers to heal. There is work to do, and all that we need to do it is here. So let us come in and then reach beyond the walls of this church. Let us fill this sanctuary with love and then harness its power to stop oppression. Let us join together in worship and let us be together on the side of love. Bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising. Days are breaking in my soul. Bright morning star arising, days are breaking in my soul. This song began as a sleepy Appalachian hymn. It's actually in our hymn book. Bright morning stars arising. Bright morning stars arising. Lovely old hymn that Court Dorsey, activist musician, took to the Seabrook nuclear power demonstrations a couple of decades back and kicked it up a notch and turned it into this movement anthem. And in the folk tradition, I added a few verses. Bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising. Days are breaking in my soul for justice and compassion, for justice and compassion, for justice and compassion. Days are breaking in my soul. For peace in every nation, for peace in every nation, for peace in every nation. Days are breaking in my soul for the healing of creation, for the healing of creation, for the healing of creation. Days are breaking in my soul for the future of our children, for the future of our children, for the future of our children. Days are breaking in my soul. Bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising. Days are breaking in my soul. Steve, I was hoping you would lead the Congregational Covenant, if that's still happening. Or is that not part of worship this morning? You are muted. I'm still not hearing you.
Technically challenged, I mentioned at the beginning. The congregational covenant of this church is as follows, and I ask you to follow along in your minds and in your hearts. Love is the doctrine of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to serve one another. May it be so.
The reading is by the Right Reverend Stephen Charleston, retired Episcopal bishop and also a member of the Choctaw Nation. It's titled Courageous. If I congratulated you on being courageous during these difficult times, would you believe me? Probably not. Knowing you, you would say you're not really that brave at all, that you're only trying to make it through each day the best you can. But to me, that's exactly the definition for living with courage. It's not always some great act of heroism in the face of danger, but rather it's the everyday courage of waking up each morning to face what life brings to you. It's the courage to go on living, go on trying, even when life is difficult. The single mom, the elder living alone, the nurse or school teacher, the guy holding down 2 jobs, they all exhibit extraordinary courage. And so do you. So let me show you the respect you deserve by recognizing what you do each day without even realizing it. Your courage inspires me. Your example gives me hope. You have the quiet courage of faith. I invite you to join in the spirit of prayer. Spirit of life, Holy One, essence and breath of all that is, we are beset by cascading crises. We hear the groans of creation, the murderous heat, the cracking collapse of ancient ice, the fury of storm upon storm, the desperate flight of refugees, the extinction of countless species. We feel the suffering of your people from poverty, pandemic, racism, and all forms of oppression. We know that everyone and everything are connected. We feel the pain of injustice and loss. But we do not despair. Despair is a luxury we cannot afford. We were born for this moment, to face the challenges before us. We draw strength from the goodness of creation and the power of love. We shall not falter. We dedicate ourselves to building a new world from the ashes of the old, a world more just and fair and peaceable. This we vow. Amen. And blessed be. I'd like to offer a poem by Kathy Jetnil Kijner of the Marshall Islands, a poem she wrote for her baby daughter. Dear Matafele Pena, you are a 7-month-old sunrise of gummy smiles. You are bald as an egg and bald as the Buddha. You are thighs that are thunder and shrieks that are lightning. So excited for bananas, hugs, and our morning walks past the lagoon. Dear Matafele Pena, I want to tell you about that lagoon, that lucid, sleepy lagoon lounging against the sunrise. Men say that one day that lagoon will devour you. They say it will gnaw at the shoreline, chew at the roots of your breadfruit trees, gulp down rows of your seawalls, and crunch your island's shattered bones. They say you, your daughter, and your granddaughter too will wander rootless with only a passport to call home. Dear Matafele Pena, don't cry. Mommy promises you no one will come and devour you. No greedy whale of a company sharking through political seas, no backwater bullying of businesses with broken morals, no blindfolded bureaucracy is going to push this mother ocean over the edge. No one's drowning, baby. No one's moving. No one's losing their homeland. No one's going to become a climate change refugee. Or should I say, no one else. To the Carteret Islanders of Papua New Guinea, and to the Taro Islanders of the Solomon Islands, I take this moment to apologize to you. We are drawing the line here because, baby, we're going to fight. Your mommy, daddy, boo-boo, Jimma, your country and president too. We will all fight. And even though there are those hidden behind platinum titles who like to pretend that we don't exist, that the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, Kiribati, Maldives, the Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, and floods of Pakistan, Algeria, Colombia, and all the hurricanes, earthquakes, and tidal waves didn't exist. Still, there are those who see us. Hands reaching out, fists raising up, banners unfurling, megaphones booming. And we are canoes blocking coal ships. We are the radiance of solar villages. We are the rich, clean soil of the farmer's past. We are petitions blooming from teenage fingertips. We are families biking, recycling, reusing, engineers dreaming, designing, building, artists painting, dancing, writing, and we are spreading the word. And there are thousands out on the street, marching with signs, hand in hand, chanting for change now. And they're marching for you, baby. They're marching for us. Because we deserve to do more than just survive. We deserve to thrive. Dear Matafele Pena, your eyes heavy with drowsy weight. So just close those eyes, baby, and sleep in peace. Because we won't let you down. You'll see. I grew up in an Eisenhower world. Born in 1952 in a New Jersey suburb, facing the American flag to recite the Pledge of Allegiance each school day morning, I learned that the United States was the best country on earth, with liberty and justice for all. I didn't question why there were no black swimmers in our country club pool. I didn't question why the black lady who cleaned our house each week always called my mother Mrs. Small. But she was always just Etta to us. In 1963, when I was 10 years old, I turned on our black and white TV and saw something that changed my life. I saw black school children, some no older than I, in the streets of Birmingham, Alabama, demanding an end to segregation. I saw them viciously attacked by police dogs and knocked over by the force of water from fire hoses. My illusion of liberty and justice for all died that day, replaced by a determination to make things right. By the time I was a teenager, the interracial optimism and respectability politics of the civil rights era were giving way to black power and black pride. As a white kid, I wasn't sure what I could do. In 1967, at the start of my sophomore year in high school, my best friend was my black classmate, Emmett. At 15, we had neither the vocabulary nor the wisdom to talk productively about race. Listening to his grievances, trying to be sympathetic, I said, "I understand." "You will never understand," Emmett shot back. By the spring of 1968, we were barely speaking. Throughout my childhood, I had found solace in nature. I remember lying under a tree on idle summer days, gazing up at the blue sky through the dappling emerald canopy. Trees were my shelter, my sanctuary, my friends. I sought out whatever ponds and streams and marshes I could find. As a teenager, I signed up for Minnesota Outward Bound to paddle the Boundary Waters Wilderness, where I gathered reindeer moss to make soup. And I heard the cry of the wolf echoing across the lakes at night. When the first Earth Day in 1970 heralded the modern environmental movement, I answered the call. The problem of pollution was palpable, the need for action urgent. I didn't understand at the time that they gave me a convenient excuse to walk away from the challenge of racism. It was, in fact, the quintessence of white privilege to avoid the hard work and difficult conversations of anti-racism because I could. When I volunteered at the recycling center, nobody called me a racist. Hiding behind what James Baldwin devastatingly disparaged as white innocence, I took the path of least resistance. Fortunately, while I was studying the literature of wilderness in college and training to be an environmental lawyer, people of color in frontline communities were tracing the lethal connections between pollution and racism. In the late 1970s, sociology professor Robert Bullard and his students mapped Houston's waste facilities and discovered that all 5 municipal dumps, 6 of 8 public garbage incinerators, and 3 out of 4 private landfills were sited in Black communities, even though African Americans made up only 25% of the population. In 1987, under the leadership of the Reverend Dr. Ben Chavis Jr., the Commission for Racial Justice of the United Church of Christ published Toxic Wastes and Race in the United States. This groundbreaking study found that race, not income, was the single factor most predictive of the location of toxic waste facilities across the United States. 3 out of 5 Black and Hispanic Americans, the report revealed, lived in communities near an uncontrolled toxic waste site. 3 out of 5. Environmental racism, Dr. Chavis proclaimed, is an issue of life and death. It's not just some form of prejudice where someone doesn't like you because of the color of your skin. This is an issue that will take your life away if you don't get involved. By the 21st century, grassroots groups across the country like Sustainable South Bronx, Louisiana's Bridge the Gulf, Chelsea's Green Roots, and Boston's Alternatives for Community and Environment were giving voice to pollution's first victims and lifting up the linkages between inequality and the ecological crisis. Then came COVID-19 and the killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. In the devastation it inflicts upon low-income people and communities of color, the pandemic looks a lot like the climate crisis, compressed from decades into weeks. And the repeated killings of unarmed Black people, sometimes recorded horrifically on video, have finally brought home to whites what Americans of color have always known, that our society is deeply infected by racism, both structural and personal. More and more, people are seeing the fatal interconnections of white supremacy, pandemic, and pollution. Climate change, intensive agriculture, habitat destruction, and live markets all distort our relations with other species, unleashing viruses that jump from animals to humans. Born of colonialism and conquest, our throwaway society throws away people as well. Long before COVID-19, people of color, forced by poverty and housing discrimination into neighborhoods near highways, fossil-fueled power plants, and other sources of air pollution, have suffered disproportionately from respiratory illness, which makes them more vulnerable to the coronavirus. They live in more crowded housing. They disproportionately hold jobs deemed essential, even while underpaid, such as in sanitation, food services, and healthcare. They can't afford to stay safe by staying home. And to get to work, many rely on public transportation, despite the risk of infection. And once infected, people of color die at higher rates because they lack equal access to healthcare. Climate change, explains Black essayist Mary Anais Heglar, takes any problem you already had, any threat you were already under, and multiplies it. It's time to talk about climate, she says, as the Black issue it is. It's time to talk about how extreme heat begets extreme violence and how that can interact with an already extremely violent police force. It's time to talk about what happens in prisons, which often lack air conditioning as temperatures skyrocket. It's time to talk about what Hurricane Katrina revealed and what I can never, ever unsee, Heglar says. When disaster strikes, the power structure will either abandon us or turn even more sharply against us. When resources run low, we will have the least, and when we try to take what we need, we'll be labeled looters and shot on sight. It's time to talk about my biggest fear about the climate crisis. It's not how will we treat each other. It's how will white people treat people who look like me. This past summer, African-American marine biologist Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson issued a public appeal to white people who care about maintaining a habitable planet. I need you, she said. I need you to become actively anti-racist. I need you to understand that our racial inequality crisis is intertwined with our climate crisis. If we don't work on both, we will succeed at neither. I need you to step up, please, because I am exhausted. Now is a time of reckoning and a time of opportunity. At the intersection of racism and pandemic and climate crisis, where do we begin? Where do we begin to confront the challenges that beset us? First, we must mourn. We must grieve all we have lost and all we cannot save. The human lives lost to the pandemic and racism, and the lives of all beings lost to reckless exploitation of the natural world. For those of us committed to movements for justice, the unhealed wounds of loss can lead to burnout and depression and render our activism less powerful, because unprocessed pain makes it harder to think, speak, and act effectively. This is why Buddhist scholar and activist Joanna Macy says the greatest danger of our time is the deadening of our response. So we must create and cultivate relationships, rituals, and communities where it is safe simply to mourn. I hope this congregation is one of them. But even as we mourn, we must act. A lot of white middle-class people like me seem to feel that change happens when reasonable arguments persuade reasonable decision makers to support reasonable policies. But the entwined histories of white supremacy, the environmental movement, and the pandemic all demonstrate that that reasonable assumption is an unreasonable delusion. If there is no struggle, said Frederick Douglass in 1857, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Frederick Douglass, 1857. Reading Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, I was brought up short by his definition of an activist. An activist, Dr. Kendi says simply, is one who has a record of power or policy change. Ruh-roh. He's saying that no matter how many times I telephone my legislator, no matter how many demonstrations I march in, no matter how many tweets I tweet, none of these makes me an activist. Changing minds is not activism, he says. An activist produces power and policy change, not mental change. If a person has no record of power and policy change, then that person is not an activist. So by that exacting but fair standard, how many of us are even activists? Now, I believe there are times to show up, speak the truth, and bear sacred witness, whether or not we prevail. Gandhi said, full effort is full victory. But I accept Dr. Kendi's challenge to take power seriously. The balance and paradox of commitment and surrender sustain me in the long struggle. 6 months ago, I became executive director of Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light. For 2 decades, we've helped congregations become better earth stewards, shrinking the carbon footprints of houses of worship across the Commonwealth and bringing solar panels to their rooftops. This work continues as an essential part of our ministry. But we know that greening our congregations, however important, does not adequately confront the climate crisis, nor does it address the systemic injustice that undergirds it. We must organize and advocate public policies to advance clean energy, reduce carbon pollution, and end decades of environmental racism and inequity. Our plan is to organize faith in action teams in every legislative district in the state to hold our legislators accountable on these crucial issues. You can find out more about our work at massipl.org. That's massipl.org. And if you go there and if you go there and click on the Join Us tab in the upper right corner and enter your name and email, we'll add you to our list. One thing you can do to make a difference right now is to let your state senator and representative know you want a strong climate bill this legislative session. The climate bills passed by the Massachusetts Senate and House have been in conference for months now, and there's no guarantee a bill will be passed at all. Please call your senator and representative's offices and tell them that legislative action addressing the climate crisis is a moral imperative, and it must include guarantees of environmental justice. Please let them know also that biomass, the burning of wood for energy in massive incinerators that pollute the air our neighbors breathe, biomass must not be defined as a non-carbon emitting fuel, because it's not. So please pick up the phone today, leave a voicemail tomorrow. Maybe you have the cell phone of your state legislator or state rep, but let them know we must have a climate bill this year, and it must protect environmental justice. Naima Penniman is a healer, grower, educator, and performance artist. She's also the daughter of Unitarian Universalist minister Adele Smith Penniman. I'd like to close with what Naima Penniman wrote in memory of George Floyd. May our grief bring us closer to the truth, to each other, to our collective suffering and significance, to our rebellious radiance. Invoke the bravery of our ancestors, evidence that survival is possible because we are here. Feel the movement of air enter your nostrils. Feel your chest expand. Create more space around the heart. Open your throat. Fill your lungs. Become buoyant. Become quiet. Hear the steady pulse of your own drum. Become thunder. Become torrential rain. There's a knee on the neck of our precious reflection, lost to lack of breath. We need to breathe deeper. There's a virus multiplying at the speed of light, extinguishing our inhales. We need to breathe deeper. The lungs of the world are on fire, scorching the forests, whose life work is to balance the atmosphere of our singular, sacred earth. We need to breathe deeper. Our children have asthma. Our grandmas are gasping. We need to breathe deeper. The machine is crashing. The empire is collapsing. We need to breathe through the contractions of this excruciating passage. Labor pain feels like dying, pushing into a ring of fire. But someone is wanting to be born and worth fighting for. Our wombs full of seeds and stars, our blood full of seers and warriors. The conch is signaling ceremony and insurrection. Become lightning, striking its yes into the atmosphere. The winds are stirring the undertow of unspoken stories, the currents of unflinching change. We dedicate our lives to a world conducive to life. we commit our breath to a destiny where all of us can breathe. Amen. And blessed be. I invite you now into a few moments of silent reflection. Our closing song is "The Tide is Rising" by Rabbi Shoshana Meir Friedman and Yotam Schechter. The tide is rising, so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called. The task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. The task is mighty, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called. The land is holy, and so are we. The land is holy, and so are we. The land is holy, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called. The storm is raging, so are we. The storm is raging, and so are we. The storm is raging, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called. The sun is shining, so are we. The sun is shining, and so are we. The sun is shining, so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called. Is ready, so are we. The world is ready, and so are we. Is ready, so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The tide is rising, so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. It's rising, so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called today. The closing words are by Padraig Ó Tuama, the Irish poet and theologian. So let us pick up the stones over which we stumble, friends, and build altars. Let us listen to the sound of breath in our own bodies. Let us listen to the sounds of our own voices, of our own names. of our own fears. Let us name the harsh light and soft darkness that surround us. Let's claw ourselves out from the graves we've dug. Let's lick the earth from our fingers. Let us look up and out and around. The world is big and wide and wild and wonderful and wicked. And our lives are murky, magnificent, malleable, and full of meaning. Amen. And blessed be.
Fred, before we move into our unison response, the Hopedale version of unison, I want to thank you very much for joining us this morning. It was a pleasure, as always, to hear you sing and speak powerful words of truth, and much, much appreciated. And we look forward to having you again at some time, live and in person, when we can all enjoy not only that, but our fellowship as well. And I would just say that you didn't know this, but in the operation of grace, next Sunday we will be taking up Blessed Are They Who Mourn, based on our Beatitude windows in the side aisle. There is much mourning this year, too much, and we will be thinking about that. And now I invite you, Fred, to say the peace be with you part of our unison response.
Peace be with you till we meet again. Faith sustain you and uphold you. Love surround you and enfold you. Peace be with you till we meet again.
God be with you till we meet again. By his counsels guide, uphold you. With his sheep securely fold you. God be with you till we meet again. Friends, let us create peace, hold peace, and go in peace. Amen.